just tell you that if you don't believe that. We are. And quite frankly, I think this is my own, I will not attribute this statement to Bill Hammond or the TAB, but I believe that we are an embarrassment to the new administration in Washington, because I believe when they look at Texas and what we've accomplished, and what we've accomplished without some of the onerous measures that they're proposing, I think it's an embarrassment. It's something they have difficulty explaining. Some other issues that you've heard a lot about, some of this is playing out at the national level right now too. The legislature enacted some very significant provisions related to health care. Passed measures for the advanced practice of nursing so that really qualified nurses, your advanced level nurses, can take on more responsibility, reducing the time demands and costs for doctors to reduce our overall health care costs. The legislature increased funding for the state's assistance to nurse training and nurse education. We defeated dozens of mandates for health care coverage, health insurance. And those are always some of the very hardest issues to debate with the legislature, because how do you argue that someone shouldn't have health coverage for prosthetic devices if you lose an arm or a leg in an accident, or that you shouldn't cover certain other critical health-related issues? The issue is not that you shouldn't be able to get coverage for that. The issue is whether the legislature should mandate that the policy included. Compare that to automobile insurance. No one mandates that you have a $50 rental vehicle replacement coverage versus $20, or a $200 deductible versus a $1,000 deductible. To the extent that you personally are willing to take on more risk, your premiums go down. If I want a policy that doesn't include all those mandates, and I'm willing to live with that risk, and I want in exchange for that a reduced premium, I should have that ability to make that decision in the marketplace. And yet we continue to fight the issue of mandates that take our personal, private decisions out of the marketplace. We feel the insurance company should have the ability, and individual purchasing insurance should have the free will to make those kind of decisions in a willing buyer, willing seller type of arrangement without being mandated. We also passed a compromise funding solution for the state windstorm insurance fund. Following the depletion of those funds through the last hurricane seasons in the last couple of years, that was a very significant event, because quite frankly, while we've been fortunate with this hurricane season, another major hurricane would have completely wiped out the state's ability to provide the insurance in that program. We also prevented any unwarranted or inappropriate changes to the Texas Department of Insurance authority this last session. We did not completely get TDI through the sunset process last session. In fact, the next legislature, beginning in January of 2011, is going to look at them again on a more limited basis. But we do feel like we forestalled any unwarranted and inappropriate changes to the way TDI actually functions. Workers' compensation, we defeated efforts to limit use of arbitration agreements for workers' compensation disputes. And a case that you probably heard a lot about was the Entergy case. That was the debate about whether you as a premise owner, if you own a business, and you hold yourself out as a general contractor, you bring in subcontractors to do work at your company, your facility, whether you should be able to cover all the workers on that site for a workers' compensation policy or not. We felt that you should be able to, if you hold yourself out as a general contractor and function in that capacity. If you don't want to be a general contractor, that's fine. Third parties can then get involved in that process. But the workers' compensation system should be available to you as a premise owner if you're willing to function as a general contractor. As I said, copies of our report are available at texbiz.org. Please pull that up and look at it. Our voting record will be released next week. Please look at that if you have questions about how other members of the legislature voted on what we consider a pro-business agenda. Two other things I'll mention very briefly. We talked about the connection between energy and environment. One of the things the legislature did in the special session was to establish a schedule for sunset review next session. For those of you that are familiar with the process, no state agency in the state of Texas that's not a constitutional agency never exists for more than about 12 years. 12 years is the statutory limit, although it gets changed occasionally. What that means is every 12 years, every agency in the state of Texas has to re-justify the reason for its being in existence. And if the legislature doesn't agree with that justification, those agencies go away. That's a built-in safeguard that in fact ensures that agencies undergo continual review. They don't just get established and exist forever regardless of the continued need for their services. This next legislative session is going to be both a tremendous opportunity and, quite frankly, a tremendous source of risk, because every environmental, natural resource, and energy-related agency is going to be under review all at the same time. The Environmental Quality Commission, that regulates all the environmental quality aspects, the Railroad Commission, which is really essentially our energy regulatory agency, oil and gas and other energy, the Public Utility Commission, that regulates our electric service, ERCOT, the agency that actually oversees the grid and distribution of electricity, the Texas Water Development Board, that oversees our water resources, and certainly with the drought situation we've had, that's going to be an extremely heightened sense of awareness in terms of how people want to change the way that agency functions to resolve some of our water resource issues. And then a bunch of others, like the State Soil and Water Conservation Board, that deals with environmental impacts, water quality impacts, water resource issues as it relates to agriculture. All of those agencies are going to be under review next session. That's going to be both an enormous workload for the members of the legislature. It means I'm going to be very, very busy. Because the way the process works is there will be a series of hearings in which those agencies' plans and legislators' intentions for them will be debated and discussed. Beginning in January 2011, there will be legislation filed that will tell us, give us a good indication of what the legislature wants to do as far as changing those agencies. The real important fact is, though, that on any other normal piece of legislation, if it's inappropriate, if it has a bad impact on business, we can work to kill that bill. Just convince enough legislators to vote against it. You're going to have a hard time convincing the members of the legislature to do away with the Railroad Commission or the Environmental Quality Commission. That's not going to happen. So that gives the proponents of measures that you may find objectionable a leg up, quite frankly, and an advantage in the legislative process, because they know those bills have to pass, and that makes the work we do, quite frankly, that much more critical and important as far as keeping on top of those issues. At the federal level, obviously, there's been a whole lot of debate about health care. I would just comment that we continue our opposition to what we feel are solutions in search of a problem. There are problems out there with our healthcare delivery systems. Unfortunately, we don't think the measures currently being debated address those. We need to be looking at tort reform. We need to be looking at portability of insurance coverage. Yes, there are changes in the way insurance works that we can put in place. So far, our opinion is those aren't being adequately debated. On the climate and energy side, the Senate has now come up with its own version of the new climate and energy bill. It has even more aggressive schedules in it for reducing greenhouse gas emissions than the House bill did. Whether or not that bill will pass, I don't know. Quite frankly, right now, I don't think there's enough support to do it. Unfortunately, there's a hammer hanging over all of our heads, and that is that the Environmental Protection Agency has already started and put into place a rulemaking process that basically says, in the absence of any action on the part of Congress, they're going to regulate greenhouse gases under the Federal Clean Air Act. And it is our position that the Federal Clean Air Act, you could be the most vocal proponent of greenhouse gas regulation. I mean, Al Gore, if he were honest with himself and looked in the mirror, would not want to use the Clean Air Act to regulate greenhouse gases. It is that inappropriate and that ineffectual. It will establish enormous administrative burdens on businesses all over the state. And I'm not talking about big businesses, I'm talking about down to the very level of the smallest businesses and institutions. Quite frankly, I think it's a game of chicken. I think EPA is doing this so that they will build support for a legislative change, knowing that doing this under the rules they already have in place would be absolutely untenable. But if you've ever played chicken, you know how that works. You just run toward each other as fast as you can until somebody blinks. So we'll see how that goes. It's been a pleasure being here. I'll be glad to take some questions if we have some time. Yes, sir.
You addressed briefly education, and of course that impacts our workforce. And I know there's been some concern in the legislature in the past session about the structure of the State Board of Education. Could you address perhaps what the sense of the legislature is in relation to what needs to be done in terms of curriculum development as it will help our workforce, our kids graduating from school?
In all honesty, probably not intelligently, because again, that's not one of the areas that I lobby in. But I'd be glad to